and welcome to another episode of the Heal Your Worldview podcast. I'm your host, James Knight, and this podcast is dedicated to tracing out your philosophical worldview, or how you see things around you, and the complex trauma that we all picked up in childhood, and how the trauma influences and directs how you're looking at things. And today I want to talk about the subjective nature of our society, okay? Now, subjectivity is a funny word. It's subjective, which means it is a word that you can adjust and incorporate different aspects of it. Like you can shift the definitions around of whatever you're looking at. You have a subjective worldview, which means one day you think X is wrong and the next day you think X is good. Okay, and I'm talking about from a moral standpoint. And we're not talking about the average evolution of a human where they see something from a certain perspective, then they finally hear the arguments from multiple other perspectives and they go, oh, and they change their perspective, right? They change how they see things. That's not what I mean. That's not a subjective thing. That is just a reacting to evidence. That's what that is. And those that react to evidence, I think, lead a better life because the amount of cognitive dissonance they are afflicted by should be significantly lower, because cognitive dissonance sucks. You know, I don't know if you've ever been caught in a lie or anything, but that weird feeling you have, man, that is not comfortable. That is very uncomfortable. I've been watching a kid. He's the nameless narcissist. He's explaining how it works for him. And I think it's fascinating how hard it is to identify with that if you're not in that headspace, okay? So he can't connect with people, but he needs people so that he can maintenance his low self-esteem, right? So he calls it self-esteem juice instead of narcissistic supply. And I actually like that term. I know he's joking around. He doesn't really mean it, but I think he's onto something, right? We need to shift how we talk about mental health in general away from these ridiculous stereotypes, okay? I can't tell you how many narcissist porn videos I've seen on YouTube telling you how evil a narcissist is. And I'm like, the more I look into it, the more I'm like, they are really talking about a psychopath. The narcissist is sitting on top a core of shame and a core of the inability to see anything that they've done as good, okay? And so then they make up all these strategies to make themselves seem like something amazing, so that when people look at them with the holy shit, you're amazing eyes, they fill up a little piece of their tank that's got a hole in the bottom that's always leaking out, okay? So specifically to this kid, the hole, right, his tank is always depleting. And why is there a hole there? Because his brain has got a negative inner voice, and that inner voice is draining his tank, okay? His inner voice has got a little hand down there on the screw, the tank drain screw, and it just keeps loosening it. So as I'm listening to this kid lay down how he experiences, how his worldview is affected, right? The point of this podcast is your worldview and what it is and how to realign the worldview, okay? So if you look at the lion's share of mental disorders, they're usually sitting on top of a core of shame for whatever reason, right? And we've discussed this many times, but it bears repeating that if you get disrupted in your childhood development and a significant disruption happens, that is the essence of complex trauma, okay? And we have also covered, but we need to cover more often, that if you're the child of parents that get divorced, you're guaranteed to have complex trauma from that, okay? So whatever the divorce rate is, half the country is guaranteed at least one or two tasty complex trauma bots running inside them just because their parents got a divorce. And if you're with someone that had multiple divorces, it's even compounded further, okay? I also think that if your parents have a high degree of hypocrisy in how they approach life, that alone might give you a complex trauma, okay? Maybe it'll give you, it could go in a couple different ways, maybe more, but a couple for sure. One of them is you see they're full of shit, and then any advice they gave you, you kind of throw it out, which is problematic because they have not just given you bad advice. Parents are It's a unique thing. And most parents at least can give you advice that they learned the hard way. And that advice is usually sound. But the problem is they're living their life hypocritically. And it doesn't take long for someone to see through that, even when they're only 10. Okay. So if you have the complex trauma, my thought is that's the essence of the shame elements that are in you, or the negative inner voice that sneaks into your mind to protect you from additional absurdity and additional hypocrisy. And so I'm listening to this guy talk about how narcissism affects him, and he's a diagnosed narcissist, NPD, and he has a tremendous amount of shame in him. So as I develop whatever I'm developing here, I'm not sure exactly what to call it yet, other than heal your worldview, but the subjective element, right? Now imagine this kid that has this diagnosis, okay? And he lives in this subjective world. So people tell him when he's wronging another human and when he's not wronging another human. But they're not teaching him the objective morality that sits underneath that, okay? They're just telling him that one's wrong and that one's right. So if you have an engine inside yourself that cannot see you've done anything good, what happens to you when someone tells you you've done good? Well, obviously you won't be able to absorb it. So the first part, at least how I would, if I was talking to this guy and I was giving him any kind of advice, I would help him understand that since he's got a disrupted experience of the world around him and a disrupted experience of humanity, he needs coping mechanisms where he can measure and say, okay, right here, I know I was good. And I'm talking about morally good, right? Right here, I can objectively measure that moment in my life and know it's good, even though my brain is screaming at me that I suck. That moment was good. That one checks out. Why? Because objective morality said so. And with that in place, I believe that even if that part of him never went away, that piece that says you're a loser and you'll never be any good, and you need to fake all your friends out so that they will admire you. I guess this is the essence of the fake it till you make it mantra. And I understand that mantra, but I also see how problematic it is, right? Because you're not faking it. You're just practicing, right? So how I look at it is when you're young and you don't have any experience yet, especially with the light switch problem, when you get out of high school and immediately you're now an adult. Here, let's flip that light switch for you, adult. And now all the stuff that society let you slide on because you were young and in school is now over, okay? You don't get a grace period. You are adult now. The switch has been activated, and it's time for you to pony up. New kid in the adult ranks. And so this guy with the narcissism, God, can you imagine how that would hit him, right? As if it wasn't bad enough just dealing with it in school. Now you got to deal with it with the consequences of reality pushing down on you. Whereas before, a narcissist is good at building fantasies in order to justify whatever they're doing to get that self-esteem juice flowing through them, okay? Because they have an ego deficit. And so can you imagine feeling hollow all the time? And the only times that you don't feel hollow is when you've conned everybody into thinking that you're amazing, but your inner voice is like, yeah, well, you conned them, right? It's a no-win situation. So let's advance some theories here, okay? So he's got a internal set of stories that keep him in a no-win situation. Now, I don't know this guy's trauma map, but I would not be surprised if his parents kept him in the no-win situation when he was a child. So now his defense mechanisms deploy the no-win situation on him aggressively, okay? To the point where now he's always scurrying around trying to find his self-esteem juice, but he can't because that voice in him, every time he gets some self-esteem in, that voice is going to reach down and empty the tank, right? Because the empty tank is what made him survive through what his parents were doing, whatever irrational stuff they were bringing to him, right? And it might be the case that he can never recover, but it also might be the case that maybe he can if he sees it. Like I'm a firm believer in the fact that once you realize what the problem is, you will eventually will come upon a way to get past it, right? Even if it's just a workaround. Okay. So in this case, let's trace this out. Let's say what he has is not ever going to be healed. And he's always going to have this thing inside him that doesn't believe he's worthy or valuable or any of those labels. At least we can help him understand that he's the guy that keeps draining his own tank. That has to change a person. Stop draining your own tank. Just keep it simple, right? Don't try to solve all the problems that you're dealing with. There's a really great methodology called the getting things done technique. And this is a CEO developed this so that he can keep track of and get all the things, all the tasks that came to him, he would get them done. And then it was a system that he would be able to circle back and review. The review process goes, it's a daily thing. And he's always, so nothing gets lost in the system. That's the problem with most systems is things get lost in there and then you don't trust the system anymore and then you stop using it. Well, in the case with the narcissist, the nameless narcissist, if he realizes that he's draining his own self-esteem tank because that's what he had to do to survive this childhood, maybe, just maybe, he can catch himself when he tries to drain the tank. Just maybe. But just being aware of it is very vital and very important because at least you could catch yourself doing it in real time. Now, I personally have never worked with someone that has a negative inner voice that's ever been able to get it to shut up. Okay? That voice is still in there. But what I have seen is that people eventually get to the point, it's like when you're dealing with a liar, right? Let's say you have a pathological liar in your life and they keep telling you all this stuff. Well, eventually you're like not going to believe them, right? It's the Chicken Little, the sky is falling problem, okay? Eventually, no one believes you. Even when you're telling the truth now, no one believes you. Or in the anime One Piece, the character Usopp, he was a pathological liar. And the moment that he really needed to tell the truth, and well, no, not the moment that he told the truth and needed everybody to believe him, no one believed him and the pirates were coming, okay? So he put himself in this impossible situation where the one time that it was true, the town was like, no way, man, we're not ever going to listen to you again. Nothing you ever say from this moment forward will we ever believe again, okay? And when you have a negative inner voice inside you, you're kind of doing that to yourself. That's the irony of all this stuff. The irony is that you're doing it to yourself because you had to survive. But how the hell do you turn it off? That's the $1 million question. How do you turn off this mechanism once it's in place, right? It's not like a human, you can just go and fix the code. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to practice and practice and practice. And I believe that it is the non-aggression principle adapted to emotional issues that is going to help someone like this. Maybe when this thing gets a little bit more traction and a little bit more success, I can start to reach out to guys like that because he's got a YouTube presence. I can say, hey man, I want to try something with you. What do you think? Let's do it. Let's jump on a session here and let me talk you through how things work from my perspective and see if that helps you at all. And then we can keep track and it's something I'll definitely reach out to him if this takes off and we'll see how that goes. But that might be enormously helpful for anyone with a shame bot inside themselves. If you feel great shame, if you feel like you're worthless, well, at least let's get you a moral code that you can depend on, that at least if you follow that, that you're not worthless. That you're not hurting other people. That you're not out of control. And any self-esteem juice that you accumulate while you're following the nap is valid and completely okay. Then you can maybe not keep draining your tank. Maybe that'll help you at least not drain your tank, okay? Or at least slow it down a little bit so that the self-esteem that you collect lasts longer. And this is a great application of seeing if what I'm talking about actually will work on someone that has been diagnosed. Because I do, at length, talk about the mental health community and how they don't seem to be helping that much, right? A lot of money is in that industry, And I don't know, what is their actual success rate? Is that even tracked? Do they do surveys of people that have gone through therapy? Like out of 100 people, what's the percentage of people that say, yeah, that actually helped me and made my life better? I can't say that worked for me. Now, my wife did see a therapist that was solid and knew her stuff, but she also had the philosophical element in there. And when she talked to my wife, she helped her make some connections that were very important. So applications of the non-aggression principle for people that have a negative inner voice and to eliminate the subjective element that's in their head, okay? Because it is my assertion that when you lie to yourself, that's the greatest sin there is, because you cannot make good decisions at all if you lie to yourself even once. I use that example of stealing a pen from work. And I'm not talking about an office worker where you're working office stuff from home and at work. I'm not talking about that. You got the pens, you're using them because you're working. That's different. I'm talking about the guy that, works in a construction company or whatever and steals a pen and takes it home and then has that pen looking at him, right? For the rest of the time, he owns the pen. And just the little story you have to tell yourself to justify that you stole the pen. It's a problem, okay? And that's just a small one, right? So the problem that we have in this culture is because everything is subjective, everyone's got a story about why they're doing what they're doing and why they're the good guy, okay? That's the whole Hitler problem. If you read a honest biography of Hitler, where they're not just Marxist, doing a Marxist hit job on him, you can see the evolution of him and how he got to where he got. And that guy was a crusader. He thought he was the moral authority. He was trying to help his people. Whatever BS he was telling himself, that is exactly how he got there. Okay, and then the road to hell was paved with good intentions, and his intentions were the best. We must see it this way. We cannot let this lesson learned from Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Trotsky, Lenin, Marx, Engels, the works, Giovanni Gentile, we cannot let the lessons learned from their hubris be squandered like this, where we have these Marxist scholars that demonize all of that stuff when they were all trying to solve the same problem, okay? We can no longer let the Marxists have their get out of jail free card because they're just as bad as everybody else. So that's the problem of subjectivity, right? Each one of those thinkers was trying to solve the problem of their time with a subjective code. And of course, a subjective code will end up in authoritarianism very often, because reality is going to say, some person's going to figure out that that's not working. Reality taught them that that's not working. And then they go to this leader that has got 100 narratives in their head about why they're the good guy. And this random person says, by the way, that's not working. Well, you just bounced into the narrative. And the narrative is, I am the good guy. And you can't criticize me because I am the good guy. And if you criticize me, that means you're evil and I can eliminate you. I mean, Fauci just did that shit for this last 4 years with this moving narrative of what happened in 2020. Okay, he kept changing his story. That's a problem. That's the Chicken Little thing. Like, okay, Fauci, how many times are you going to change your story? That's a big deal. And we all see it. And it all resonates with us. Even if you're ideologically on the Democrat side, it can't be a good thing that you see that there's a huge problem in how he changed his mind. I mean, how he changed his message over and over again. Okay, no matter how he justifies it. It's a very big problem. So the non-aggression principle is required to destroy subjectivity. Subjectivity is a huge factor in anybody with mental health disorder, because what is the essence of the mental health disorders? Well, they disconnect you from reality, at least partly, okay? Well, because your complex trauma disconnected you from reality, partly. Or fully. It depends, right? Schizophrenia is a thing. How do people get so disconnected from reality? Well, there's lots of explanations for it, but the fact is people can become completely disconnected from reality, and we know that they are in big trouble, okay? So if you're 50% disconnected from reality, well, it's not as bad as a schizophrenic, but it is 50% of the time you're in a space, a headspace that is not real. And we're not talking about a fiction writer or someone that works in any kind of genre where they're inventing fantasy. We're not talking about that. That's a different thing. We're talking about someone that has made a narrative that's not real in order to protect themselves from something that they did or was done to them. And that is a devastating headspace. It cannot help them if they're 50% of the time in the illusion. So the majority of what I try to do here is I try to bring people back to reality as much as I can. What are the facts? What are the facts? Drill down in there. And what I find is when I am counseling people, when I'm having sessions with them about the philosophical side of their problem, I have to keep reminding them over and over. Half the time I spend is reminding someone that this thing happened and that they connect with it. There's like this, the cognitive dissonance is a big deal. The cognitive dissonance leads to disassociation, and disassociation is when facts are hitting you and you can't absorb them. And so a big piece of what I do is just to remind somebody, hey, by the way, don't forget that this happened, and it happened like this, especially in breakups, especially if one person is just having a hell of a time letting the other one go. You have to remind them of how bad it was, okay? Because what happens to them is they fixate on only the good part. They cherry pick the good parts, and they ignore the bad parts, and then they pine for the good parts as if they didn't have to suffer through all the bad parts to get that small kernel of, wow, that was really a good day. And it just over and over again, right? Reminding. And I started using these recordings as a mechanism to help remind someone not to forget how this, and this happened. And, gives them a little, like, they could just turn it on, listen to it for a couple minutes, and then turn it back off if they're struggling for whatever reason. So if any of this rang true for you, please do comment down below. I really need to start gathering as much data as I can on if this seems like it's going to help you. Like, do you have a negative inner voice? Do you struggle with right and wrong? Do you have no idea what that even means? Are you, find yourself moving from event to event and someone told you you're wrong and you don't know why? Let's really dig into that, because this is the foundation of a healthy self-esteem, is knowing that you have done something correctly from the standpoint of right and wrong, okay? How do you make sure you don't wrong another person accidentally? And if you do wrong them accidentally, how do you make it right? Right? Our laws do not cover this. The justice system doesn't cover anything like this, okay? Because supposedly in our justice system, if we break a law, we go in front of the man and we pay our debt to society. So we go to jail. But the person that was actually wronged, does that even give them any satisfaction that you went to jail because you wronged them? I don't know. It seems to me that an understanding that the person did wrong them and an apology is the most important part. But that seems to be the part that you don't get with the justice system. And the justice system now is more about the state versus everybody else. So even though if I stole someone's car and went to jail for it, I'm still paying my debt to society, but that's more like paying your debt to the state. And the guy you ripped off his car, who knows how that even gets worked out. I guess a punishment is rendered, so there's that. But is that enough? Is that enough for people to get closure on a thing? It's a great question. It's a philosophical issue, I think, at the core of all of these disorders, okay? Even though there was a trauma event or a complex trauma event, which is, multiple traumas strung together, creating a super trauma. I get that's there, but the problem is the parents were not following the NAP in the first place, okay? This is a topic for another podcast, but parenting by understanding property rights, I think, is the way forward out of this mess, because even though a little kid technically is not a moral agent, we have to treat them as if they are, because they're a moral agent in training. So if you want them to honor property rights, you must model that action. Your kids model what you do. So if you're a hypocrite, let's say you're a subjective moralist, well, your kids are going to see you breaking your own rules all the time, because today you needed to break your rule. well, that they are going to not respect you, and you're going to lose control of your house. Because if your kids don't respect you, they're going to fight you. Okay? I mean, they're kids, that's what they do. And the more hypocrisy you load into your life, the more they fight you. So we got to get out of this circular trap that we're in as we raise every generation and we pump them full of subjectivity because we're pumped full of subjectivity, and around it goes. So I hope you found some value in this episode. And if you would like or possibly subscribe, I would really appreciate it. It helps me get my message out there. And as always, thanks for listening and have a great day.